Good morning, and thank you for joining us for the first of our spring webinar series. I'm Edith Juguna, the Director of the Illinois Education and Career Success Network. And today's webinar is on lessons from the learner voice about the student success movement. We are fortunate to have Nate Simpson, Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to lead us in today's discussion. He'll share a little bit more about himself. And we'll also have time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, just keep them in mind. You can drop them in the chat, but we'll also have time for Nate to address those questions. And now I'll kick it over to you, Nate.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Edith, and thank you to all of you for allowing me to come in during this time after many of us are coming out of spring break, or maybe going into spring break, or starting off our week with this information. I will say that I'm hoping that our time together will be a good start to the week, because I know all Mondays are exciting, but I can't make any guarantees, but I will do my best to make sure that this time is useful. As Edith mentioned, my name is Nate Simpson. I am a Senior Program Officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I sit on our post-secondary success strategy team and our early learning and pathway strategy team, which basically means as a program officer, I have the privilege of working with two different teams, though both are working in tandem on the purposes of supporting students. But the other part of it means success means that I have a lot of work to do. But that aside, I am excited to know that I am able to do these type of opportunities with you, and also explain a little bit about what the foundation does. As you can see on the screen, beyond the fact that I am not only a person that has been with the foundation for almost 7 years, I've worked in education for 15 prior to joining the foundation. And I have always been someone that has been curious and always interested in trying to see ways that not only can higher education do a better job supporting and serving students, but also just education in general, which we'll talk a little bit more later. We are a foundation that is interested in making sure that all students across the country are able to take advantage of many of the things that I know many of you are part of the network are actually achieving. But that's a little bit about what the pathway strategy at the foundation is working on. It's been around for probably a little bit younger than many other strategies on our team, or I should say at the foundation. It's been around since 21, but that is in comparison to our K-12 strategy that's been around since about like 2008. So as you can see, as a strategy, the team is fairly new, but in many ways, a new team that is interested in actually continuing to provide this type of information that we're going to talk about today with the presentation I have for you all today. So speaking of presentation, what are we going to talk about? Here are the objectives that I'm hoping that we'll achieve by the time we're finished. Essentially, our time today, I will take time to show you some information the foundation learned back in 2022 regarding learners and their interests around education post-high school. Then I will move on to sharing some ways that this relates to some areas where we know the education systems are responding or actually doing something in response to this. And then finally, I will wrap it up with everyone knowing a little bit more about what can be done as a result of all of this information, with some tips that I have been able to glean from many other practitioners like yourselves across the country, which hopefully will be useful. So let's get started with the session by getting through first objective, which is to share a little bit of lessons about what we learned from an opinion poll that was done back in 2022 about the value of education in the US. So lesson number one, if I were to headline the first one, would be that learners seem to be looking for more support beyond financial aid. And so where we got this from with this opinion poll, which I would say you can find on the foundation's website, which it's linked below. It was done through in 2022, and it was done by HCM strategists and edge research on a couple of hypotheses. Essentially, I'm going to go through where all of this came from verbally, but as I said, if you want to take a look at the research methods, I would encourage you to take a look at the link. In the end, I'm going to focus on some parts of this report that I think that is more important for this time, or this group will find interesting. Overall, this report showed that when you go through a focus group process, you can go through that and look at different opportunities. We were able to use an online survey, or I should say HCM strategists and edge research did a survey and had about 1,675 high school graduates. And that was done between March 18th to April 14th, 2022. So initially, there were a couple of hypotheses that this research was looking at, and the four were focused on the way the decisions about getting or obtaining a college degree. The working hypothesis was the decision about going to college was about it being financial. The second was the value of a college degree was really up for debate. So that's another hypothesis. The third was what was making things unclear was what they should do next, was a third hypothesis, like what should they do next was unclear. And the last but not least was that the pandemic was making transition from high school to college. It was having a major impact. So those are the four hypotheses the research started with when it came to the opinion poll. As you can see on this slide, we're not necessarily talking about all four, but we're only talking about one of them. And the one that this slide focuses on is the decision to attain a college degree is mostly financial. So as you can see, based on what is highlighted, we can see that financial concerns, or more or less that hypothesis about that financial concerns are the most important thing. And it's highlighted, and I don't know if you can see it, but yes, as it looks, you can see that debt or finances is up there when it comes to their interest or their concern. But what is just as equal are, you can see on the screen, one of them I'll just highlight, it says job counselor who will help you make connections, prepare for interviews, help you find a job you are looking for. The other one being a counselor to help you figure out what to study, classes to take, meeting major requirements. But what this is interesting about is that it's very high when it comes to the other things that you would think are normal when it comes to their opinions. It's 73% of them said that this is most important or extremely helpful or very helpful, which is similar to the financial component. So as I stated, this research report is basically stating that many students, when it comes to what they're looking for or why they are going or what is causing the delay or them not continuing, it seems that they're saying that it's not just financial anymore. It's both financial and wanting to make sure that they're going to get support. And it being holistic seems to be the next thing that, or I should say, becoming really highly important. And that's the first lesson. The second lesson is the research also shows when you get under the hypothesis about whether there is low certainty around their next step, meaning that whether or not they're unclear about what they should do next with their next step. When you take a look at this pie chart, when you get under the hood of what that actually means, this pie chart, we can see that our learners have a lot more thinking going on when it comes to making their next step, especially when there are a lot of other options. We can also see from this pie chart that we see that this learner group has specific expectations about what they should get from their post-secondary high school institution. And if that isn't available, many may not want to attend, let alone continue. So, at the end of the day, as you can see at the top, the second lesson that was taken from this research that I wanted to highlight is that learners have become better consumers, and they have specific expectations about what it means to go on to continue their education. And many may be showing up in the door with, a view on what those supports should be. The other is, that, transition for our learners, that we can see that they're not taking it lightly. And in the end, they have a lot of opinions about what they'll do. But we should realize that the learners want to continue, but they need their systems to know the transition exists and that we're ready for them, which I think is most important when it comes to what I would say from this research that I see that is in the chat, if you ever get a chance to look at it. So in the end, those are two lessons that I would say this research has given Foundation back in 2022. And as always, I would totally encourage you to continue to take a look at the research, as you can see in the future beyond these two lessons. So to the second objective of our time, I wanted to talk a little bit about, how did all of this inform the student success movement as a result of all this? And I'm glad that you asked that question, because what happened is we learned that in that one way that many community colleges across the country are doing is in 2015, they were faced with this challenge and needed to articulate a clear way for all of this to show up in what they actually were going to focus their redesign efforts around. And the research revealed that colleges had to create a guiding framework that helped them focus their efforts around how volumes of students would have a chance to see their end goal when they start, to avoid this feeling or this thought of throwing them into the abyss, this aimless road where they had to fend for themselves. So in this image, we took a look and realized that what you see on the screen is the Foundation learned that a critical component is that, solutions like improving dev ed for students, having better advising, or even having some technology to help improve advising, and even quality digital learning or courseware for students. All of those are critical solutions or interventions that help students. However, also we learned all of this goes well when this is grouped together in an idealized student experience that organizes all of these interventions. And as the screen stated, we learned that many institutions across the country are using this type of approach that you can see on screen. And many of the colleges are calling it guided pathways. And this model encourages that institutions should continue to redesign themselves around what students are looking for, which is when they exit from their experience into going into whatever is next or transitioning, that there is a clear path and that there's an intention that the institutions have taken as it comes to what they should do. So that is one thing that we're learning that many institutions are doing in response to those lessons learned from that time frame. And as you can see, since 2015, the involvement of this type of response has just ballooned across the country. This is just a map that gives you an example of what that looks like. But the foundation invested in this effort back then. And it was obviously, like I said, called Guided Pathways. And it helped it started, or we funded about 30 institutions and back in 2015. And that grew to over 400 now and more across the country in many different regions. And we have seen there's early evidence that many early adopters, including the state of Tennessee, they're experiencing increases in their key performance indicators where the percentage of students completing 24 more credits in their first year has doubled from 12 to 24%. And the percentage of those students completing gateway courses in their first year increased for math specifically by 27 percentage points, and then English 20 percentage points in both, and in both 25. And then credit accumulation and gateway course completion has doubled for all student groups. And as a result, though, we know many that there's still some work to be done when it comes to making sure equity gaps are closed, but yet and still we have some useful or high expectations that many institutions that are taking a direct approach to address racial equity in their work, they will see those gaps close as a result. So this is one thing that we know, that as a result of those lessons, what could be done and what many institutions and in many ways, what they're taking to do when it comes to helping students transition from their high school into college as a result, and to make sure that those students are actually getting what they're expecting when it comes to what they've stated from their opinions, that they're looking for that support, and that support should be done in a way that is proactive and not necessarily reactive in a way. The other way that this implicated the student's success based upon the research that I showed you earlier is I wanted to share some other research that was done in 2018 to 2019. And it was done with focus groups across the country with different types of regions and learner groups and in influencer groups like parents and other adult influencers. The project gave practitioners, even folks like myself, to hear from a lot of learners what their experience is when it comes to developing what they want to do in life. As you can see from this slide, we learned that learners already have a point of view. But if that is the case, then I'm guessing you're asking, what should we do as a result of if students actually come in with a point of view? And I'm glad that you asked, because that led us to learning that most of their learners have a point of view that can be organized into a framework, which came from this research, which is about surviving and thriving. So if you take a look at this slide, you can see that when we did these focus groups, that essentially the learners have an idea of what they're hoping to get out of their education and how it fits when it comes to attaining their quality career. And the framework helped us, or helps in many ways, understanding the emotional and aspirational states that young people go through. And these states are not focused, or I should say fixed in any way, but rather there's a continuum where they go from flowing from one state to the next. And we can continue to use this as we think about, again, we should believe that students have a point of view and they are knowing what they want. And I would highly encourage you, that link down there in the slide, to continue to take a look at it. It has some great interviews. There's some great resources. There's a nice presentation that you can modify and use for yourself. But again, for me, I love the opportunity to go to these focus groups across the country, because you're able to learn so much directly from the students, but learning from different folks in different regions or in the US. And in the end, you can just park yourself in understanding that they have a point of view, they know what they're looking for, and most importantly, they're looking for ways for they can get partnership when it comes to what they're looking to achieve for their own life when it comes to transition. So this leads us to our concluding slide, or I shouldn't say concluding, but our last objective, which is, okay, Nate, this is great information, but what should we do? And I'm glad you asked, based upon what I've learned. And I have a couple that I would like to go through with you from all of this, or at least some conclusions that we can draw from all what this information is saying to us. So for point number one, you should know your data and your learners. And so, as you can tell from the other slide, it reveals that all of us should take a moment and just look back and know what our data actually is saying. I would recommend for many cross-sector groups that might include having like vertical meetings where institutions can join their regional school districts to know what is going on and what is going to happen next in these type of joint meetings. I would also highly recommend, I've seen it in the past where folks could use an objective third-party organizer to facilitate these conversations, just because it kind of makes it a little bit simpler to have those conversations, or to reveal what might come from those data points, which I know many of you are doing as you're part of this conversation and getting the support from the network as well. The second point I would want to put out there is just acknowledge that learners, that they have agency to achieve their interest. And if you didn't realize it from this research or from other research, we should remember that learners actually know what they want and really are looking for affirming guidance and not so much targeted in a way where they're going to be pushed into certain areas that they don't really want to go. And so we should be making sure we acknowledge what the learners actually are already come in with and build off of their skill up to that point and take that approach, because it's really important in the grand scheme of things. The last point that I would put out there as an opportunity for ongoing improvements is to take action, and is to do something. Take action and do activities that are going to help the learners. Folks should always, in education, should think about what they want to do, look at the data, but sometimes I've seen, or I've been a part of those conversations, that you see the data and you actually don't do anything. Like you see it and you're like, oh, that's really bad. And then you go on to the next thing. And it's not like egregious. Like sometimes you're just doing 13 to 30 things at once. But I would encourage, or I would say, like, it's nothing, being busy is true. That said, you should also, swing for the fences sometimes and actually try some things. And the things that you should try, from what I've learned, is you should try things that are prototypable and not a pilot. I'm sure many folks have heard this before, but I just love to reiterate it in the sense that prototyping within your organization is way stronger than actually creating a pilot. And I've seen or learned that, pilots, when it comes to trying to create things, they're very tiny. But a prototype is designed from the very beginning to be what is considered likely to be able to handle what it would look like in real life. And that's what I've seen sometimes when many of us who want to start something, we want to pilot something, but then when we try to go where it's supposed to include volumes and supposed to work with many, many all at once, the pilot doesn't work. So I would say, prototyping is the best way. And prototyping is all about trying things and seeing if it works and trying to identify what you're trying to achieve. And what that means is when you prototype in your organization, there's a possibility that you should, and this is to this last point on the screen, which is about just normalizing that you're going to have to see if you're going to have improvements for what you're trying. Prototypes, there are many that are put into practice that just fall apart. They just don't work. But that doesn't mean that it was a failure. It just means that it was a prototype and we should take a moment and learn from it and see what could be done better. And then let's try it again or make some improvements so that we can get a better prototype the next time. So more or less, and I've seen many institutions, many cross-sector organizations partner together in putting that into practice and making it normal. That it's like, and it's hard, right? When you have external stakeholders, maybe a foundation, but to totally encourage folks to what is been characterized as a very familiar phrase of like failing fast. I would totally encourage it. Like, go and try it, see what happens. And then, because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we're giving this impression that we're actually doing something that's designed to help students, or at least make sure the students know that we know what's going on, or we're actually trying to do something different as a result. So those are the top 3 things that I would give as tips based upon what we could learn from the learner. I would also just mention a lot of this information we have, as you can see, as a foundation, we're always trying to share more information and make sure that practitioners have access to things that we're learning or what others have worked on across the country, and just trying to make connections. I would encourage you to always continue to check back with what we have learned or what is being learned from different organizations and regions across the country. One of those sites that we would highly encourage is the Accelerate Ed initiative that we have worked with the network on up to this point. We're super excited about what they were able to produce out of that work. But as you can see, that's the site that I would totally encourage you to go on. This site has other connections to other sites that we would encourage folks to look on, and actually just subscribe and go online so that you can continue to get updates about how this is going. But as I stated, this is just one resource, but this resource will give you a lot of connections to meet others that is just things that we're learning. And if you're like a higher ed or education geek like myself, it's always great to have more information or have access to this stuff. At this point, I just want to take a moment. I think that I have done well with time. I normally could talk 4 hours on this topic, and I am glad that I have done a good job in not drawing it on too much. But I would highly encourage, if you are interested in continuing to talk more about this, as I said, my name is Nate Simpson. I appreciate you all taking the time to let me talk to you about some of the things that we've learned up to this point. As you can see, I'm available online if you're interested in continuing, or if you want to reach out to talk more, that's my email address as well. And you can always just reach out if you're looking to just learn a little bit more about what I've learned through my website as well. But it has been a true pleasure in allowing me myself to talk you through some of these lessons learned. And I will, at this point, stop here and just throw it back over to Edith to see if there is anything that we wanted to talk a little bit more about what was shared so far, or any other questions that has come up so far.
I do have a couple of questions. So you mentioned that learners indicated that they want quality holistic supports. Could you share some examples of what those supports look like? And also, what equity considerations should we keep in mind while providing these supports?
Yeah. So I think like quality supports, they are the supports that in the, I should say, higher ed academy were outside of the classroom. So, quality supports extends into, quality advising, considering what type of, how should I say it? Intentional tutoring support that can be available. And then other resources like expecting that the students may come in with needing, food insecurity challenges that might exist, and having that information available. But I'll make a special note about that resource from my own experience, which is, when we think about wanting to make referrals for students, I used to think or work on, when I did it, which was I would actually go try and see what those referrals actually are like before actually having them available. Or just simply, if I did have a site, I always was keen on making sure that if I did say a student should use it, or groups of students should use it, I would click on the link myself to see if the link actually works and what it actually says. But that's what I kind of like. Much broadly, you could say that's the idea of holistic support that students are looking for beyond what they're going to normally get in the classroom. But the quality part is that you think about that they actually are working, that they'll work. You put something there to make sure that it's going to be responsive and useful. And the last but not least, that it actually fits into a broader experience for the student, and you're actually aware that those supports should be embedded when it comes to when they're doing the work. So, if a student, if a students normally struggle in their first semester, you have planned activities for them as a result. Or if you know that students in their second year, they may or may not return, but you have those big programs like keeping them to come back, making phone calls, whatever the case may be, as a method of just continual habitual conversations. Peer support is another example, but those are the type of quality holistic supports. The last thing, when it comes to the question about diversity, equity, inclusion, it goes back to that last point, which is about giving the students or recognizing the students' agency when it comes to what they're hoping to achieve. We've learned that a lot of the times there is this idea that, when you're providing supports with students, that they are just supposed to be receivers of it, but that doesn't necessarily acknowledge that they may already know or have some point of view about what that should look like. So you can involve equity in that way by acknowledging their own involvement and trying to attain what they're looking for when it comes to support, or just anything when it comes to what they want to do with life. Like I said, from that focus group research that was done across the country, students they come in. So a simple thing might be, is just maybe just to ask them, or have them write it down, or draw it, or have them draw it for you, so you can kind of pick up on, you're seeing what they're saying and trying to do it and doing it where this is going to be something that becomes useful. My point before about the partnership, that's what they're really looking for. When I've learned, they're looking for the systems to work together, number one, but number two, to partner with them and not necessarily dictate what they should expect or how they should perform. And if I learn, if we don't do these type of things, what we're going to see is more students actually looking for better options then. And like I said, they are just becoming better consumers.
Thank you. Super helpful. My other question actually had to do with sort of balancing how we guide young people while incorporating their perspectives, because, you mentioned that they come with a point of view about how they want to achieve their goals. And you brought this up in your last comments, but wondering if you have any other thoughts there.
I think my only thought about that is, it's certainly something that I've learned. I don't know if it's unique to the US education system, but what I've experienced or seen is that normally in the US educational system, it's very, we know what's best for you approach. And I would say that by and large, that mindset is kind of eroding, especially when it comes to learners who are transitioning from out of high school. Like I said, from that research was 2022. So not saying that this is brand new in many ways, but it has become more evident that is becoming more the majority than what it has in the past when it comes to it doesn't work. And it doesn't allow for a lot of things. And obviously, when it comes to also thinking about how you help them think of what they should be trying to do and give them the space to do it, the idea behind giving them a pathway or something like that when they start gives them a chance to at least make decisions as they go, but it's not necessarily making decisions that's going to lead them all the way out of into a whole different reality, and there's no end to what they're trying to get to, but it gives them something to think about while they're starting and as they make decisions. I mean, the idea of switching always happens, but it should be like informed switching and not just random acts of change that doesn't really help them continue to make progress. So that is where the agency still fits in when it comes to providing them an end goal. I've heard about it, right? Like some folks are like, well, if you tell them what they have to do, they're not going to be able to make a choice. And it's like, that's not necessarily the truth. I mean, and then by and large, I have seen the research. I mean, there's videos on another resource that I've seen where like a lot of students come in with the expectation they thought educators had thought about all this in advance. And then for them to be expected to know it, they're just kind of upset. So finding the balance, I know that's kind of cliche to say, but providing like the kind of paved out trail for them does help. And it helps a lot all at once in a very meaningful way.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Nate. This was really informative. And thank you everyone for joining us.